I'm dividing this video up, this post-AT chat, into two parts because it was over an hour and a half long, almost 2 hours long. And so I'm dividing up into two sections. So this is part one, and it is with Savor and Slugger, two solo female hikers that started off obviously solo, but ended up hiking the last part of the trail together and summited on the same day together. So I'm gonna share with you the first part of this video, and then I will give you a part two that'll come up after this. So be looking out for it.
For a
All right,
second.
so I'm so excited. I think this is my fourth video chat with people that I met on the Appalachian Trail. So I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves, but I'm so excited. And this is a kind of unique thing because Savor and Slugger both started as solo hikers, right?
Yep.
And they ended up summiting together. So it's going to be a fun story to hear about. But go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Okay, I'll start. I'm Liz, trail name Slugger. I started the trail April 10th, 2024, summited on September 6th, 2024, so 149 days on trail. And I met Caboose at the Notch Hostel in New
Right.
Hampshire.
Yep. Yep. All right, Savor.
I'm Christy, or trail name Savor. I started the AT on March 27th and summited Katahdin on September 6th, which I don't think I've actually done the math on how many days, maybe like 160 in that realm. But I met Caboose at a shelter in Vermont.
Right.
And then kind of was in the same area as you through most of New Hampshire, there in like New Hampshire. I was with you guys through the presidentials in the White
Right.
Mountains. And
Oh,
then
that's
after
right. Because you
that,
were going
yeah.
to,
Yeah, we were all
you
around
yelled
each
down
other.
at us from one of the mountains, I think.
Yeah,
And yeah,
because she was going through and she was peak bagging the presidentials.
yes.
Yep.
But I was like, I'm done. I want to get out of here. I want to hurry up.
Yeah. Well, you had come up from,
Yeah.
you started a good ways back from where we were
Yeah.
that day. So that was a really long day for you.
Wow.
Yes, it was.
So if you haven't been on my channel before, my trail name is Caboose, and I started on the 22nd of March and finished on the 9th of September. So during that time, you interact with a lot of different people on the trail. And I was really fortunate to have these two be a part of I would consider you guys part of our extended family, because I think we spent a lot of time in shelters together, or, like once we saw Slugger at the Notch, we kept on running into you guys. You were faster than we were. You both were faster than we were, but we, whether you took a little bit more time here or whatever, we were always fortunate to be able to meet back up with you guys for quite a while. So we already know what time you guys started, but when did you guys decide that you wanted to hike the Appalachian Trail? What was it for you guys that was like, I need to do this?
Savor, do you want to go first? Do you want to take it?
Yeah. So I don't remember exactly when I started thinking or why I started thinking I wanted to do it. I know I think it was sometime when I was in college. By the time I graduated from college, I kind of had this idea in my head that I wanted to do it and maybe all of the Triple Crown trails someday, but wasn't sure exactly when. And that probably came from when I was in college. I was really involved in our school's like outdoor education trip leading organization. And we would often lead trips on small sections of the AT. And there were OA alumni who had done the long trails and talked about it. And I just thought it would be a really cool thing to do, to be out in the woods hiking every day for like 5 months. And then I went to vet school, was working as a veterinarian, and had kind of decided that I was going to go back to school to get a PhD, and that it would make sense to take a little bit of time off between my last kind of veterinary position and starting the PhD program. So I was kind of like, I'm in this point of transition right now in my life, and I can take the time to do this right now. I had previously thought about potentially doing it in 2016 before I started vet school, but decided not to for various reasons. And I knew with starting a PhD program, I'd be going into another long period of time in my life where I wouldn't be able to take that sort of time. So I was like, if I really want to do this, I should do it now. And so I kind of made up my mind that I was going to do it one way or another.
Awesome. And you guys were both beast mode. I have to tell you, you guys were both beast mode.
I didn't start out that way, but I appreciate your perspective.
Oh, yes. Well,
Yeah, I definitely didn't either.
and Savor, how old are you?
I'm 32,
Okay.
about to turn 33.
Oh, you're what? Say it again.
32, about to turn 33.
Well, happy early birthday.
Thank you.
And Slugger, how old are you?
29. I turned 29 on the trail.
Oh, okay. Good. I had my birthday on the trail too.
Yeah.
So, all right, go ahead and give us your story.
Yeah. I didn't grow up in like an outdoorsy family, so I didn't really spend a lot of time as a kid outdoors in the same sense, as like being on the AT, camping, hiking, not really like that. I played a lot of sports. But one of my childhood best friends, her family was big into camping. So they had taken me a couple times to some local state parks, and I mean, as a kid, yeah, it's fun. I had a good time. Um, but then in high school, I camped a little bit more because then I had my license, so I could drive to closer state parks by myself and go camping. And then one year, I went to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park with my dad and my cousin. It was the first year, and every year after that, we started going annually. So the first year we went zip lining. We hiked a little bit in the park. I think we did the Ramsey Cascades Trail
Okay.
the first year. But we drove up to Newfound Gap and we went to Clingman's Dome. And like a lot of people, when they're at Newfound Gap, they see that sign on the AT that says Mount Katahdin. Yeah. So that's what a lot of people get that first bug about the AT.
Right.
And I was just like, oh, that's pretty cool. I've heard of the AT, maybe like someday I'll do it. I don't know. And then just the more I started camping and hiking, the more I was like, oh, I actually like this a lot. Maybe I want to like dip my toes in and try backpacking because, there's the AT. Maybe I still want to do it. Because I just overall in general in my life, I'm very goal oriented and very ambitious. And when it comes to hiking, the AT is like not maybe not really a crown jewel, but it's one of like the largest ambitions that a backpacker can um go through. So I
Right.
was like, hey, if I like camping and hiking enough, maybe I can do this like grand challenge and actually accomplish it. Um and then when I was in college, I had just thought about it more and I was like, yeah, I think I'm gonna do it for sure. And then I think it was one of my professors who wanted us to come up with like some goals we wanted to accomplish in 5 years. And I was doing the math, and 5 years at that time, from that time I was gonna turn 30. And I said, okay, so I wanna through hike the AT before I turn 30. And that's what I did.
Yep. And I think it's a crown jewel, in my opinion.
I think so. I think so too. I think so too. It's amazing. Like the
Yes.
community around the AT is just something special. It
Right.
separates it from other long distance trails, I think.
So, our Savior, I want to hear like, well, I know that you did a lot of wilderness stuff because we talked about that a lot, but where was your backpacking experience? Like, how much backpacking experience did you guys have before you got on the Appalachian Trail? And then, Saber, I want you to share a little bit about that role that you had with the wilderness, and because you kind of helped us on that one river crossing, as far as
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of went through it, but you were, like you have to go sideways, and so you had a lot of knowledge that I think helped a lot of people.
Yeah, I guess I really want to go way, way back. My My family was never really into hiking or anything like that when I was growing up. But I had a good friend, my best friend when I was in like third and fourth grade. Her family liked to hike, and her dad had a tradition that once he felt each of his kids was old enough, he would take them up to stay at the Lake in the Clouds hut and climb Mount Washington. And so when it came to be her turn to do this, I had been getting invited to go on some hikes at little local woodland areas. And so I got invited to join them along with my dad. And I just thought it was the most amazing, wonderful thing. And so then when I was in middle school, I started going to an outdoor education, kind of outdoor adventure sort of camp. And mostly did kind of like fun little outdoor challenge activities, day hikes. But as I got older and kept going back, started doing trips where we would go on maybe like a 3-day backpacking trip just around the grounds of the camp, or go on, go on some like longer overnight trips and things like that. And then when I got into college, that was where I think a lot of my like, more formal experience comes from, because I went on we had this program, this outdoor action group, that the main thing that they did was that they would organize pre-orientation backpacking trips for the freshmen. And so I knew I really wanted to go on one, and then I wanted to get trained to lead those trips. And so I would lead every year, like a week-long backpacking and rock climbing trip for incoming freshmen. And in order to do that, we had training in a lot of different things, like risk management and first aid and kind of group dynamics and facilitation, that kind of thing. Because part of our role was introducing these freshmen to kind of a group of potential friends and to what campus life was like. We would usually have a night where we discussed kind of their fears and concerns about starting college. And through that, I kind of had a lot of additional opportunities to get more advanced wilderness first aid training. I ended up becoming the wilderness first aid instructor, as well as the coordinator for the wilderness first aid program. Oh, wow. So I was in charge of kind of like at one point, my friend and I rewrote all of the wilderness first aid protocols that the leaders kind of have in a manual that we take out with us on the trips. And for kind of reworking the curriculum for that aspect of the leader training. I also got to do a wilderness Leave No Trace Master Educator course that was run through Knowles, which was another kind of little backpacking trip, and would occasionally go on other not OA related backpacking trips with graduate students, other college students, just for fun. So that's kind of where most of that experience comes from. With the river crossing training, we did definitely have a couple different protocols, and I think I had maybe learned some of that maybe through OA or maybe through a training for another trip I had been on. But that was also something that I looked up along the trail just to like brush up my kind of the recommendations on how to safely cross water crossings, especially in New Hampshire, knowing like I think I actually looked at some of that stuff up at the Notch because I knew that we were headed into a section of the trail where there were going to be a lot more unbridged river crossings.
And I definitely looked it up before the 100-mile.
I only remember one crossing that I felt like was really sketchy, and that was the one that Savor you did with us. Did you?
Yeah.
Don't you think that was the sketchiest?
Yeah, and I think that was part of why I was looking it up at the Notch, because it was right after that big tropical depression had come through that we were all at the Notch waiting that storm out. And so I think we knew that the water crossings might be kind of high. Some other hikers that I'd talked to the day before had done it and said that it was pretty high and that they were kind of they were like, we were okay, but like it
Yeah.
was not the safest. I think it was maybe up to like thigh height on some of them,
Yep.
which is not recommended.
No, that's how high it was
Um,
on me. And,
yeah,
but it took us a while to kind of figure out where to go across. But it was
yeah,
nice that there was more than just one person there, right?
yeah.
So, what about you, Slugger? What is your backpacking experience? And
Oh, not much. I live and grew up in Indiana,
mhm.
Northeast Indiana at that, so not even in like the hillier parts in the south. So not much. About an hour or so out from where I live in Fort Wayne, there is, I think it's Salamone. I don't think it's a county park. Maybe it's a county preserve, um, or something like that. I'm not sure what it's technically classified as, but Um, it's a big reservoir that they drain during like the winter months.
Right.
Um, and there, just above the reservoir in the tree line, there is a 13-mile backpacking loop that has maybe 4 or 5 campsites on one side of it that overlook the reservoir. So I have had gone there 2 or 3 times maybe before getting on the AT. Um, Other than that, I went for a couple overnights in Zaleski National Forest in Ohio.
Hmm.
Um, and then I went on the adventure hiking trail in southern Indiana. I think it's in Monroe. I don't remember the name of the national forest, but it's like near Hoosier National Forest.
Hmm.
I took my dog there for an overnighter, but nothing more than 2 nights. I'd
Wow.
only gone, I think, just one night. I'd intended to do the whole adventure hiking trail. It was only, I think it's only 27 miles, I think, something like that. I had intended to do the whole thing with my dog, but we went in July and it was super dry and it was her first time backpacking and she was not a fan, even though I kept her pack under 10% of her body weight. She wasn't a fan of it and
Right.
she didn't want to put her pack on in the morning. So I said, okay, that's my sign. She doesn't want to do this, so we'll head out. But
Yeah.
I wanted to do the Knobstone Trail before getting on the AT.
I
So
heard
that's
that.
another, it's a 70, 50, 70 something mile long trail in southern Indiana also. Um, but the week I was gonna go, it was just super rainy and wet. And I know I should have gone anyway because it would have been good practice, but
Right.
I knew that I wasn't going to enjoy it. Like, yeah, it would have been beneficial for me to test out all my gear in the field for a rainy weekend, but I kind of thought, I'm going to get to Katahdin no matter what. So
Right.
I'm going to endure the rain and I'll probably enjoy it a little bit more knowing I'm actually going towards a really big goal as opposed to like, oh, it's a practice hike. Don't follow that advice. Take the practice hike.
Right. Yeah, I didn't do a lot of hiking in the rain before I got on either, but there are so many areas that I want to touch on with you too. I want you guys, we're going to go back to like when you guys first started in your solo experience, but I want you guys to talk about the rescue
Yeah.
that you guys were a part of, and then
What's
we'll go
crazy
back
is that
because that was
anytime
pretty intense.
anytime people ask me what's the craziest thing that happened to you on the AT, I just forget that that even happened.
Mhm.
I told like I'm sure in the past all these people who had asked me about it were wanting some crazy story and they could have had one. I just totally forget that that even happened.
So between the
Um
two of you guys, tell that story.
Yeah, so Savor and I met for the first time in I think it was at Woods Hole Hostel or maybe it was just before that at
I think it was
because you
Burke's
you always
Garden.
kick in
Yeah.
really late because you were a late hiker.
Hmm.
I think it was at Burke's Garden. Like I was already
Yeah.
in bed and you had just came in. I was like, who's this person just coming in? And then
Yeah.
we
I
had met
don't think
again
we
at
actually met. Like we were
no,
both there, but I don't think we actually introduced ourselves
I don't
until
think
like
so.
two nights later.
I think we like formally introduced ourselves at Woods Hole because I think you and Starbrook
Yeah.
were trying to link up and she and I had been kind
Yeah.
of hiking around each
Yeah,
other since
that's
the
right.
basket. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's where we had met and then we had just flip-flopped with each other a bunch. And then it was when we were climbing up, what was the peak before Baldpate? It was after that pond.
It was Old Spec.
Old
Yeah, we were
Spec.
climbing up Old Spec, and it was this like that whole first week that we were a couple days that we were in Maine. It was just like gray and misty, like lightly raining,
It was
like a little
nasty.
bit cold and wind. Like when you're above
Yeah.
the tree line, it was definitely windy. Um, and I remember like climbing up that shoulder of Old Spec, and there were a couple areas where it was exposed enough that you were getting some wind. And you're scrambling up over these rocks. And I just remember thinking, like, this is really not ideal conditions to be doing this alone.
Yeah, I was
And
thinking the same thing. I was like, wow, I
yeah,
probably should not be up here at all, let alone by myself. And then
yeah,
I think when I
yeah.
was
I had
I was
stopped for
behind
a
you.
second, in like a little section of the trail that was kind of behind some trees. And when I was stopped there, someone was coming up behind me, and I looked over my shoulder, and Slugger's head just like popped up over the rocks. And we were both so happy to see each other. We
Oh
were like,
yeah.
oh my gosh, we have a
I
friend
had
here now.
never
We're
been
not
so happy to see
alone.
somebody on the trail that whole
Right.
time so far. And especially it being you and somebody that I knew, I was like, okay, like this is a much better situation
Right.
just like that. And
Yeah,
then
so then we managed to go the wrong way twice. We accidentally started up the spur trail that went to the summit of Old Spec,
Mhm.
and then noticed that there were blue blazes. So we doubled back, and then we went the wrong way and went back down the way we had come until I recognized a rock. I
Yeah.
was like, this rock looks familiar, and we realized that we'd gone the wrong way again. So then we turned ourselves around and like got over that section.
But it
The
was the
whole
worst
time,
section because it was the most exposed. So we had gone
yeah.
through it
The
3 times.
and then after that, like the rest of that hike down into Grafton Notch was fine. The whole
Yeah,
way
I mean,
Slugger was kind of debating whether she was gonna
mhm.
go into town or keep hiking.
Yeah, but
Um,
you were like, no, like if you get off trail, then the chances of us finishing the trail together, because we had kind of talked about that
yeah,
going down into Grafton Notch, because like I knew that you wanted to finish before September, and
yeah,
I was like, well, I would kind of like to finish before September too, just because I wanted to do it in under 150 days. That was my goal setting out from Immokalee Falls. And I was like, I don't know, it'd be a nice round figure just before September 1st. So then we were kind of talking about, okay, how can we finish the trail together and meet your deadline without killing ourselves along the way? And then you had said, if you get off trail, then we won't finish the trail together. And I was like, okay, you're right. I very specifically remember saying, if it's sunny and warm at Grafton Notch when we reach the parking lot, I'm gonna stay on the trail.
yeah,
And then we got down there and it was sunny and warm, and I was like,
yeah.
okay,
The
I'm
sun
staying
just
on.
like just barely peeked out.
Yeah.
And then we went on, like hiked up, started hiking up Baldpate. Another
We
hiker that we had met at the Notch had been dropped off while we were sitting
Mhm.
there eating a snack. And so we started talking to him on the way up, and he decided that he was going to hike with us for a while. Um, we got up over the first peak of Baldpate, and we're both kind of like, wow, that snuck up on us. Like, this is going really well.
Not
Like,
so
I didn't even
bad.
realize we were that far along. And kind of went down through the saddle, and we were coming down this like little scrambly section, and like heard voices up ahead of us, and saw Pierre and another hiker that we had met, Solar, kind of standing off to the side of the trail. And we went up to them, and we were like, oh, hey, what's up? And Solar just goes, do either of you have any medical experience? And I was like, yes, but
Mhm.
also, oh, what's going on right now? And saw like over his shoulder that there was a tent that was pitched behind him in this just kind of random spot, like right off the trail. And it was early enough at this point that it was kind of like, okay, like
I think
what's going on?
it was like 1 or 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
It was pretty early in the day
Yeah, yeah, or
because we were up
maybe a
there for a
little,
few
maybe like
hours.
3.
I think
Yeah.
Solar
Um,
told me it was 2 o'clock.
Yeah, because
yeah,
we
I
were up
think it
there
was
for a
around
couple
2 when
hours,
Solar found her.
Yeah.
and then it took
So
us a
by the
couple
time we
hours
got
to
there, I think it was closer to 3 or maybe even 4. but still like a little bit early for someone to just like be in their tent.
Especially on your standards.
Yeah. And it also was not an ideal camping spot. You're
Right.
not pitching there unless you have to.
Yeah. It was like, yeah, it was in a bit of a like shelter. For how high up it was, the shelter was okay, but yeah, it's not like a spot where people would ideally want to stay the night. So he explained to us that someone had broken her ankle climbing up the slippery rocks on the second peak of this mountain, and that he had already at that point called been communicating with emergency responders to try to organize a rescue for her. And he told us that they were going to try to send a helicopter and that we needed to move her to get her to the spot where a helicopter would be able to come in and pick her up. When he first found her, she was at some degree of hypothermia based on his description. And he'd already done a fantastic job of getting her warmed back up. He had set up his own tent for her and kind of gotten her in there in warm, dry clothes, sitting on her foam sleeping mat for some insulation from the ground. So by the time we got there, she was like fully aware and speaking clearly, had good color, was no longer hypothermic, thankfully. So she was pretty stable at that point, but did have an unstable ankle injury that would make it challenging for her to be moved. So we kind of all worked together to kind of figure out what we could pull out of various people's gear, primarily her stuff, and what we could use to improvise a splint. So we splinted her ankle and then got her moved up onto this more elevated area. But unsurprisingly, given the conditions, they were not actually able to land a helicopter there. So then we were kind of back out in the cold and wet and in an exposed, windy spot where we were all starting to get cold again. And thankfully at that point, we kind of scouted out more sheltered areas that we could move her to without having to kind of go back down the rough, scrambly terrain that we had brought her back up. And at that point, some people from the local fire department who had been sent in to be kind of on foot rescuers, to touch base with her, arrived, and they kind of took over. They had a little bit more kind of
equipment.
They had more actual first aid
They
supplies.
could give her a real splint instead of out of trekking poles and a foam mat and some bear cord.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, anything else you want to add to that, Slugger?
Yeah. No, that's about it. Yeah, it was, thank goodness for Solar and also herself, because she was very aware of what happened to her.
Right.
I think she had said she was a nurse, so she had some
Right.
experience in that area. So she knew what happened to her as soon as it happened, and she knew how to get herself in the best possible situation to come out of it in the best possible result.
Right.
And then, I mean, Solar, he knew they were not landing a helicopter up there, even when they had insisted to fly one in. So he was very persistent with the person on the phone. You need to send a hiking team up too in case we can't get her out with the helicopter. And thank goodness he did that, because that was what ended up happening.
Right.
Once we were sure that she was in good hands, they sent us off. But I mean, I think all of us were like pretty hesitant to walk off. It's a hard situation to leave when you like know
Did Solar
it's a
stay? I felt like he stayed. He left?
So I think one or two of the people from the rescue team stayed the night with her up at the peak in like a little like alcove of trees kind of away from the wind. Solar had gone back down into Grafton Notch, and then me, Savor, and Pierre hiked on. I think it was 2 more miles to the next shelter.
Right.
Yeah,
it wasn't very far. But we were up there for a couple hours, and the weather had just gotten worse, and we still had to go up to the peak,
Oh yeah.
and it was just all rock, all wet. You couldn't see more than 10 feet in front of you. So we had kind of slinkied, the three of us. So Pierre went ahead, and then I was right behind him. And then we would walk a few hundred feet, and then he would turn to make sure that he could see me coming up. And then I would stop when he stopped to turn to make sure Savor was right behind me. And we just did that until we got out of tree line or
Right.
down in the tree line. And yeah, we all ended up getting warm and dry and fed at the next shelter. And we went into town the next morning. We only had a few miles back
Right.
out. And then on our way out of camp, we could hear the helicopter coming in to get
Right.
her down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was in at Grafton Notch the next morning when she was getting rescued. I was
Hmm.
able to interview uh the team that was going up to get her.
Oh,
Like, and
yeah.
but Solar was there
Hmm.
and he was eating breakfast. There was a trail angel there doing trail
Yeah.
magic. And but I think that um Solo must have been up
Hmm.
there before that because she was sending us messages like, this is really sketchy. Don't be worried
Oh,
about like stepping on the grass or grabbing trees. Grab whatever you can because it is really slippery and really dangerous. So
yeah.
be careful. And so if that lady was up there trying to get to a clear spot in that kind of situation,
Hmm.
and then you guys, I think your weather might have been worse than ours because we came in the second day right after you guys.
Hmm.
And if it was like
It still
that,
wasn't great from what I remember being in town the next day,
right.
but
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah,
But
it was
that
just,
was, mm,
especially like those specific peaks, because they were some of the most exposed and non the most hard faced, I
right.
would say.
Yeah.
It was definitely like trying to walk vertically down a slip and slide when we
Yeah.
were going. It was just, it
Yeah.
was not safe for sure.
No.
But I mean, sometimes when you're in that situation, you really don't have any other choice
Right.
other than to just be as safe and as cautious as you can and get out as quickly as possible
Right. Be
in one
grateful you
piece.
have other people around you, you know,
Hmm.
that just having that alone just gives you a little bit more sense of, if anything happens, I'm going to be okay kind of thing. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
The three of us definitely trauma bonded over that situation, and
Oh,
then
I'm sure.
we all made it to Katahdin together.
Yeah. That's
Yep.
great. So tell me some of your experiences while you were solo hiking, when you were by yourself. Like, did you have any um, like scary moments, or did you have any really cool encounters with people, or any wildlife situations anything that made you uneasy, or, were you afraid to start by yourself? Like everybody asks you all those same kind of questions,
Hmm.
like you're going all by yourself and,
Yeah.
you know,
Especially as a woman, like I
right,
would get that little added piece of commentary, like, "Oh, you're gonna be like a solo like woman out there? Isn't that scary?" And yeah, like I would fall asleep every night thinking like how excited I was for the trail and like what would I do in this situation? What would I do in this situation?
right.
And I mean, a lot of the situations I would come up with were scary, uncomfortable situations.
Mhm.
Because I knew that that was a very real possibility, either relating to wildlife, weather, or other people on the trail.
Mhm.
Um, and some nights I would kind of psych myself out a little bit, like, oh my gosh, maybe like these people are right, maybe I shouldn't go. But then, like, as soon as I stepped foot on the approach trail at Amacola Falls, I just forgot about all of that.
Right,
And hardly ever when I was on trail did I think something scary or something bad was going to happen.
right,
It was just the most positive experience I'd ever had. And even like the sketchier situations, looking back, were just a little bit, made me a little bit more uneasy in the moment, than what
right,
realistically, how dangerous they actually were. You meet some weirdos on trail or some people who want to hike around you that you're not really feeling, but you don't want to be confrontational and make it maybe a worse situation than what it could be.
right,
So sometimes, as long as you feel safe, you're just annoyed and you want to hike around somebody else, just change your pace up is what I ended up doing. Take a little bit more time off.
right.
Um, I think the most sketchy situation I had was I had gone into New York City um, from the Pawling road crossing,
Hmm.
going into Pawling, New York.
Is that where you
Um,
take the train?
yeah, so I think the train from there like only goes on Saturdays, or it only stops
Um,
at that station on Saturdays. So actually, I got a hitch into the city from Trail. This
oh, wow.
wonderful woman was driving by, and she had asked where we were going, and it was me and Wiggum, and we said we're trying to get to Pawling to take the train into I think Brooklyn or Manhattan. Yeah, I think that's where the REI is. And she was like, "Oh, I live in Brooklyn. I'm going there right now. I'll just drop you off." And she was awesome.
Oh, that's cool.
Shout out Kristen. She was great.
That's great.
But Wiggum had other plans after leaving the city, so she and I split off.
Mm.
So I took the train back to Pawling by myself, which was fine. No issue with that. But the train skipped Pawling and went to the next town over. Like it stopped, but the
Oh,
doors didn't open. And
no.
so I panicked in like 2 seconds. I'm like, because I had like my whole plan set to where, I knew I was gonna get dropped off at the station at X time. I had enough time to do 10 miles, go to whatever campsite I had pre-selected in my head. But that all went down the drain as soon as the train took off from where I was supposed to stop. Um, so it just went to the next town over, and that stop was just as far from the AT as Pawling was,
Oh,
but it wasn't as like trail friendly. I think Pawling had, I think it was like a barbecue place or some like small restaurant that could have that they accommodated hikers, but this other town didn't. And so I just looked at far out and I said, I guess I just have to walk. It was like 3 miles, a 3 mile road walk back to the AT.
mm,
And I was on the phone with my husband and telling him my woes and how frustrated I was. And I was like, I'd like to get a hitch if I could, but I'm not really sure because this isn't like the most trail friendly area. I think not that it was sketchy or anything, but
right.
it's not like Hot Springs where people know about the
Right.
AT through hikers. So I said, well, just, keep my mind right, and if I get the right opportunity, I'll take a hitch. Otherwise, I'm just okay with walking back.
Right.
Um, and like 5 seconds after we hung up, so I was walking against traffic on the left-hand side, and then somebody was driving in the right lane, some weird looking guy, and he just kind of slowed down. He didn't come into the left lane into oncoming traffic, but he was like slowly driving in the right lane, and he was just like, "Hey man, do you need like a ride?" And he just gave me really creepy, creepy vibes. And I said, "No, thank you. I'm okay. I'm not very far from where I'm trying to go." And he was like, "Are you sure?" Like he was definitely trying to get me in his car. I mean,
Wow.
he was probably just trying to be nice, but
Right.
my gut said absolutely not.
Yeah.
And then thankfully he drove off, but I had like my phone at the ready, just in case I needed to call somebody, or at
Right.
least to make it look like I was on the phone.
Right.
That's normally a pretty good deterrent, but
Right.
I also had mace in my front shoulder pocket, so
Yeah.
I was prepared for something, I guess. I don't know. Never had to use it.
That's
That was the
good.
only time I felt like maybe I should
Right.
maybe put that in my front pocket
I think you
instead.
always have to follow your gut. Always.
For sure, for
Yeah.
sure. And that was the only time I think where I felt even remotely sketched out by another
Right.
person. Um, the trail has its fair share of unique individuals, but nobody had ever made me feel unsafe on trail. But that one weird guy, one weird guy in New York in his
Right.
blue little Yaris wasn't was not a fan.
What about you, Savor?
Yeah, I think kind of similar. Along the trail itself, I never really felt unsafe or had any uncomfortable experiences. There was one night, like very early on, where I ended up being the only person camped at a shelter. And
Early
that was
on.
actually the first time and only time that I've ever been totally like camped alone. Because along the trail, like most, especially if you're camping and stopping near
Right.
shelters, there's pretty much always people around, other
Right.
hikers. Um, but I was at a shelter that was like a decent ways off the trail. It was a really pretty nice one, but there was nobody else there. And so I was kind of deciding where I wanted to stay for the night, and I knew that there was supposed to be a pretty big storm coming overnight. And a lot of the good spots to pitch my tent would have been kind of under trees that had some sketchy looking branches. So I was like, no, I don't want to pitch my tent there. So I decided that I would just stay in the shelter. And I kind of got all set up, like ate dinner, was getting ready to go to bed. And I just like sleeping in a shelter, like on my mat, like visible to anybody who walked up, just felt kind of exposed.
Like
And so I
you
actually
didn't
ended
have your
up
tent
pitching my
walls.
tent inside
Yeah.
the shelter,
Right.
which is the only time that's kind of like a no-no. Like it takes up too much space. It's not really considerate to other people. But in that situation, I was alone. I was pretty sure I was going to stay alone. And if somebody else did show up, there would still be plenty of room for them. And if it became an issue, I would take the tent down. And then at that point, I wouldn't be alone anymore.
Right.
But so yeah, just having that visual barrier of like if someone did come up, they wouldn't necessarily be able to see who was in the tent.
Right.
Like for all they knew, it could be like a 300-pound man.
That's right.
Who's in there. So they're probably
It really
not
all
gonna,
depends on
like,
how far along you're on the trail, though. He'd be 300 pounds or not.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, this was
But-
like right after Neil's Gap. So
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, I think I know what it was, like a mile off the trail. I know what shelter
Yeah.
you're talking about. I didn't stay there, but when I had gotten dropped off at, I think it was not Hogpen Gap, but it was somewhere just after Neil's. I don't quite remember exactly. And I was walking, there was some guy just walking on a side trail, and I was like, where did you come from? And he's like, oh, I stayed at a shelter a mile off the trail. I'm like, you walked a mile off the trail for a shelter? That's crazy.
Yeah.
I bet he didn't do that halfway
but-
up the trail.
My brother and I
No.
saw that and we're like, no, we're not doing that.
Yeah.
We'll just keep walking.
That was crazy.
Yeah.
I can't believe it.
yeah, at that point, I think in other circumstances I might have skipped it, but I had left Neil's Gap pretty late that day because
Yeah.
I had decided that I needed to replace my pack and get a different one. And that took up a huge chunk of the morning. So by the time I started hiking, it was like 12 or 1 or something.
Oh. And early in the
And-
hike too, so you don't quite have your trail legs.
Right.
And
Yeah.
Georgia.
And that was probably one of the, like, I felt pretty good hiking that day and had made pretty good time. But it was probably like 8 miles to that shelter, and going to the next one would have made it 13.
Right.
And I was very much early on following the rule of like, don't hike more than 10 miles, eight.
Right.
Honestly, for the first couple of weeks, I don't think I rarely did more than 8 miles, certainly never more than 10. The Smokies were the first part of the trail where I did over 10 miles consistently. So yeah, it wouldn't, maybe if I had started right at 7, I could have gone to the next one and skipped it. But some people that I had been hiking with did exactly that. And then were kind of like just a little bit ahead of me for a while.
Right.
But yeah, it was the right spot to stop for me that day. But it was, and I kind of knew that I knew going down that side trail, there was a chance I was going to be the only one there.
Mhm.
And a part of me was like, well, this is something that I should try to get comfortable with. And so like at some point you just have to do it.
Yep.
But yeah, that was kind of like it wasn't uncomfortable. It was something that I was like a little anxious about. But logically, I knew that there wasn't really a reason to be. So that's more of just kind of like the paranoia that comes with so many people telling you that you shouldn't be doing this, especially as a woman. Yeah, it's the only times I ever encountered situations where I was like a little on my guard, was like, I'm gonna keep an eye on this person because I don't really know what's up with them.
Right.
Yeah.
Those were like either in town or at a road crossing.
Right. Yeah. And as far as like going off trail a mile for, like depending on the circumstances, like you got to do whatever you can when you're there, because every situation's different. Like there was a couple times where season 1 and we stayed a mile or half a mile from the next like hostel or something because we wanted to go in the next day and have a full day and spend the
Mhm.
night instead of having two
Yep.
nights at the hostel and just to save a little bit of money.
Yep.
And so
Yeah.
we only did our Nero was really like a zero. We hiked like 1 to 3 miles,
Hmm.
and that was it. And so, it all depends on, where you're at and what you're able to do or what you're willing to do or whatever. So, but that was from Mountain Crossing, right? Is that where you got your new equipment from?
Yeah.
West Gap? Yeah.
Yeah.
Injuries? Anybody have any injuries?
Nothing
No.
significant. My knees would get, especially towards the end of the trail, my knees were getting really sore, but it wasn't like anything
Right.
anything major.
You just taped them up and kept on going because I saw
Yep.
the tape all over them. You were a trooper.
Yeah, the tape
You
was
still have the
largely
tan lines?
preventative. Yep, I still have the
Yeah.
tan line.
They're
They
pretty sick.
faded. They're not as dark, but they're
Yeah.
still there.
Yeah.
I mourn the day that my watch tan line goes away because I think once that tan line fades with the rest of my skin, like that will be like the stamp to end, I think, my trail experience. And I'm really dreading that. So maybe once the weather turns, I'll start wearing my watch
There you
again
go.
so that it never
Yeah,
fades.
yeah. I don't ever take mine off. Mine's always.
Yeah, my
What
watch is
about your
always
any
on.
really cool hostels that you really liked, and then any really cool trail magic experiences that you had?
Um, there was a lot of really cool hostels. Um, the Green
Woods Hole
Dragon,
is
I really
definitely a
loved.
favorite.
Woods Hole. I wanted to stay
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
And I
Woods
agree,
Hole was
the
great.
Green Dragon is a really nice one too.
Yeah, I think in the South, probably the Green Dragon was my favorite. Either that or Chica and Sunsets. I just enjoyed the smaller nature of the hostels. And then Chica and Sunsets, the owners of Chica and Sunsets, and then Donna and Bill at the Green Dragon, like they were all four of them were just such awesome people and great people to talk to and really hospitable, and they wanted to talk to hikers about their experience so far and give them advice.
Right.
Um, and they were all connected to the trail before they opened their hostels. So I really enjoyed those in the South. Um, there was kind of a dry period of hostels in like the mid-Atlantic. I
Yeah.
think most of the time you're relying on either like free church hostels, sort of, and they're not really hostels, just churches that open their basement to hikers. Um, accommodating restaurants like Dee Dee's Tavern in, I think that was in Jersey or New York. It was close to the border. Um, or hotels in the mid-Atlantic. But getting back into the Northeast, I thought all the hostels in the Northeast were pretty great, except for the one we stayed at after after
Yeah.
our rescue situation. I don't remember what it was called. Not sure I want to put them on blast, but
Right.
the Notch I really liked, and the Main Roadhouse. That
Yeah.
one might have been my favorite, the Main Roadhouse.
Oh yeah. I didn't
Yeah,
stay at that one.
yeah.
Did
A
you
lot
guys
of
do
people.
Station 19?
Yeah, yeah, I stayed at
Yeah.
Station 19. Yeah, JD was
Station
awesome.
19
He
was
was,
fun. We did
yeah, he was
karaoke
nice.
there.
We did too. Were you there when we were there? We did I
I
Will
think
Walk 500 Miles.
I think they do that for everyone who goes
Every Saturday
through.
they do
Oh, we
karaoke.
had so much
Yeah, I
fun.
think you were probably there earlier than I
Okay.
was. I hadn't caught up to you guys yet, I don't think.
Okay.
Yeah.
We were there with um, Tin Cup, Tea Time, Flutterby. I wish I could remember the one guy's name. He was a lawyer out of Nashville.
Oh,
And then Mowgli, I think his name was. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. That was one of my highlights.
yeah. That
So,
was a fun hostel.
yeah. What about Johnny's? Did you guys stay at Johnny's?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you guys
Yeah.
ride the bikes to the Mexican
Yeah.
restaurant?
No, I
Yeah.
took the bus.
Oh,
I
you
took their
did?
little shuttle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't take the bikes we took the bikes in the morning to um McDonald's for breakfast.
Okay.
Nice.
Yeah, that was what we did.
We
And
rode.
then, yeah, we went to the little outdoor store too. And then there was like a little skate park that
That.
was that we found. Yeah, it was were like biking around. We went past this little skate park, and a couple of my family at the time just like rode the bikes around the skate park. It was pretty funny.
Yeah, I got there later in the day, like just before they were closing their front shop, and I was barely able to get a bunk. So I didn't spend much time there, just enough to do some laundry, eat some food, and then go to sleep and then hike back out.
Right. I think we got there. We might have taken a zero there. We didn't take very many zeros, but I think we might have taken a zero there. But we rode our bikes to the restaurant that was attached to a gas station.
Oh,
It's a
yeah.
Mexican restaurant, and it was pretty good. But and then a lot of the time we were staying with people that we knew that acted as trail angels for us. So
Mhm.
in Connecticut, season one had her sister and her friend that had a house, and they let us stay at their house and slack packed us for a day. I had a former principal in Franklin that let us stay in his cabin, just in Vermont, like all over the place, all the way up the
Mhm.
trail. We had people like that. Did you guys experience any of that?
That's awesome. Not people that I just knew before the trail,
Mhm.
but when me and Savor, this was one of the days that we were aligned between Virginia and New Hampshire. We went into Warwick, New York with our friend Wiggum,
Mhm.
and Wiggum, Savor was going to get back on trail. Wiggum and I were staying so that we could watch a movie at the drive-in and camp there. And so we weren't gonna be able to do laundry or have a shower for another like 3 days after that when we were planning on going into New York City.
Mhm.
And we were already on day 5. So I'm like, if we can avoid going 8 days,
Yeah.
I would prefer that. So we were just at the grocery store, and there was a woman behind me in line when I was checking out, and she had asked if I was a thru hiker. You can kind of smell and spot them
Right.
really easily in towns. So I told her, yeah, and we were talking about the trail a little bit, and she had hiked with her husband Sobo, I think in 2019. Super, super nice woman. Her name was Super Squirrel. And she had said that she had met another thru hiker in the store who she was going to give a ride back to trail. And I was like, oh, that must be Savor. Does she have short hair? And she said, yeah. And I was like, oh, that's really nice. And then I got my groceries, went out to the front of the store outside so that I could reorganize my food bag. Wiggum met me out there. Savor met me out there eventually. So we were all three there. And then Super Squirrel pulls up in her Jeep, getting ready to pick Savor up. And we were chatting, and I had just asked her out of curiosity, do you know anywhere we can get laundry and a shower? I'm not able to find anywhere that offers either of those services. And she said, no, not really, but you guys can come to my house. And so she took Savor back to the trail. And then she took me and Wiggum back to her house. Beautiful, beautiful home. She had a pool in her backyard, and she was canning homemade pickles. And she was like, she had a basket of like bathing suits. She was like, here, pick a bathing suit out and go swim. And then I'll put your guys' laundry in the
Oh,
washer. Yeah. Oh, she was
wow.
fantastic. So she had did our laundry while she let us use her beautiful pool, and we just got to relax a little bit in the sun for a really nice Nero day. Um, and then afterwards, we got showered and took our clean laundry, and we just sat in Super Squirrel's house and drank some wine for about an hour before she took us back to the drive-in.
Wow. Yeah, that's
And that
fun.
was only 2 days, maybe 3 days before Wiggum and I got the ride from Kristen into New York City. So we had some really, really fantastic trail angels and trail
Right.
magic in that
Doesn't that
little
just
section.
make your day when you have those people that are so nice and
It was awesome. And we
yeah.
were telling Kristen, the woman who took us into the city, about it. And she was like, oh, what's a trail angel? And we were just like, you are. You are a trail angel. You're giving us
Yeah.
some of the best trail magic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you, Saber?
Yeah, that was is a really good example. As
Mhm.
we had gone into that town, but I wasn't entirely sure how I was going to get back to trail.
I
I think
wish
I
you would
was
have
probably
stayed.
going to like I don't know, try to get someone in the grocery store parking lot to give me a
Right.
ride. And we were just walking around, and this woman comes up and goes, "Oh, are you a thru hiker?" And asked me if I was going to need a ride back to trail. And I was like, "Actually, yeah, that would be awesome."
Yeah.
And then later that day, we were coming up to a road crossing where there was an ice cream shop that was like 0.3 miles, 0.2, 0.3 miles down. And so I was planning on just like walking down and taking a little detour to get ice cream. But the last little bit of the trail, there were these two other guys who were just day hiking. They, I think, wanted to get into maybe hiking the AT someday, but were trying to like build up the stamina to do longer hikes. And another thru hiker that had been kind of in the same area as me for a while, Sigma, was there. And so after I kind of passed them and like took a slightly different, there was like a spot where the trail branched off, and was kind of like a little bit of a shortcut to the road. Because it led out on like a little bit down the road closer to the ice cream place. And so I think they and Sigma went that way, and I went the kind of official AT way.
Right.
But then as I was walking along the road, I came up to the parking lot where they were. And I think Sigma had been telling them that she was planning to hitchhike to get into town. And they were like, "Oh, no, don't do that. That's not safe. Like, we'll give you a ride." And so they ended up offering me a ride up to the ice cream place too, and then bought both of us ice cream.
Oh,
And then
Nice.
dropped me back
That's so
off
sweet.
at the trailhead before taking her into town,
Right.
which was a good one.
yeah.
Another one of my favorite, another good one was I came down into Crawford Notch, and there was a woman there who had been driving like an RV along the trail and like keep pacing her husband essentially and kind of supporting him, but also doing trail magic for hikers. And so she gave me a little breakfast sandwich,
Oh.
and some other snacks.
What
And
was
then,
her husband's name? Was he Bojangles?
oh, what was it?
Was he from Florida?
Um, I don't think that was it,
Oh,
but I
'cause
don't remember.
we got breakfast sandwiches, and the lady was from Florida, and her husband's trail name was Bojangles because he had a tin cup on his backpack and it kept on jingling.
Okay. Honestly, it probably, if it was at Crawford Notch, it was probably the same person,
Yeah.
because that was a point where we were staying at all of the same shelters
Right.
or campsites through the White.
Right.
So and you guys would have gone through, you guys left camp before me. So,
You guys were early, or like I thought I was an early riser out of camp. You guys put me to shame.
Well, I would wake up at 5:30 all the time without an alarm
yeah.
clock, but it was funny. I would lay there because but as soon as the first ear pad opens up, that's like the alarm
Yeah.
clock. Then the second
Yeah.
one goes, then the third one goes, and then we all start packing up and going.
Yeah. But I had someone, like a friend of a friend of a friend,
Mhm.
take my bear can with half of the food I'd resupplied, in Lincoln to the little like trail museum that was a little ways down the road from from the road crossing at Crawford Notch. And I had heard that it probably wouldn't be too hard to get a ride from that parking lot to the museum, because it's a very popular trailhead parking lot. And that if I wasn't able to, that it wasn't a bad walk because it was flat. There was a pretty wide shoulder. But she offered me a ride, and so she like gave me food and then gave me a ride, and then ride to the place and then a ride back to trail. So that was a nice one too.
Right.
It made that a lot easier.
Yeah. Okay, that is the end of part 1, and part 2 will be following. But I hope you've been enjoying our chats. I know I have been. And so I'm going to close this out. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you on part 2. Bye for now. Peace out.